Hello everybody, you're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain. This is the weekly radio show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We head over to the Rhylight Zone for a short story and or some poetry. We catch up with Twangling Jack Ford over in the Oak Shed for a weekly album review. And we play local, unsigned and or independent music. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Archer on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. And we are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please do leave us a short review on your podcast platform of choice. You can also reach out to me here at the studio on dane.cobain at wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain at wickhamsound.org.uk. So this week we're going to be chatting to author Mark Arnold. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain, and this is Betty Accorsi with Lively House.
It's that time again. I knew this would come. Oh, I don't wanna say goodbye to my only one. Oh, I wanna say that you are my world, my passion, my smile and joy, but I can't find the words. How do you do this to me? It hasn't even been long. It seemed that happiness and me weren't meant to be, but you proved that I was so wrong. Oh, I wanna tell you about the beauty I see in you, but do you have the time? It'll take you happiness and me weren't meant to be. But you proved that oh so wrong. How lucky have I been to find someone like you, keeping my eyes hazy. And I'm not really the dependent kind, no. But soon as you leave, I start going crazy. Wow, did you do this to me? It hasn't even been long. Seemed that happiness and me were meant to be. But you proved that oh so wrong. Why do you have to go away? Can the world just wait a minute? 'Cause I just wanna say how much I need you. And that doesn't take a second, does it? But now the time has come. The second you're here, the next you're gone. And all the tears in the world can't make this feeling go away. I just want you to stay.
That was Tears by Dan Pride, and before that we had Lively House by Betty Accorsi. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to be joined by this week's guest, who is author Mark Arnold. The first question is kind of a generic one. It's what I want to ask every guest I have on, which is, what was the last book that you read, and what did you think of it?
What was the last book I read? I have a stack of books that I need to read, so I decided to start reading books that I purchased sometimes years ago.
Yeah.
But it's Jim Gaffigan. His book about food is the most recent book I finished. And if I don't know if he's known in UK, I think he is, but he's a stand-up comedian, and he does a lot of comedy about food, things like that.
Yeah.
So he put it all into a book. And when you're reading it, since I've seen a stand-up act, it's sometimes it goes around in your head, and it's like, that's pretty funny, and I'll laugh out loud about his observations and stuff like that. So
yeah, do you read it kind of in? Did you kind of read it in his voice?
Yeah. And fortunately, he wrote it that way too. So it makes it for a fun read. It's not like, oh, this is a drag, and then, whereas, on stage he's different. No, it's like he's telling you, so it worked.
Cool. So obviously today I want to chat to you about your writing. A good place to start would be to ask, how long have you been writing, and where did you get your start?
Well, I mean, as far as what you consider my start, when I was in college, and this is in the late 80s, I was originally going to be in television, and I did end up working in television, but I was going to be a director. That seems like everybody's dream. And then I realized while I was in college that, hey, the writer is probably the better thing to be, because you can write the script, and the director just kind of makes the script come alive, but has no say-so in what. So I started writing scripts, and I did little comedy shows and things like that at the time. Getting into the industry after that proved to be a little more difficult. I did work for a TV station for a number of years, but mainly in administrative and behind the scenes things. So I still needed some sort of a creative outlet. But nobody would publish me. And I've said this in many times when people ask me this, how do you get started? Sometimes you have to take the kind of like the little red hen attitude, is like, well, nobody will publish me. Well, I'll publish myself. And, it's even easier now when you're doing the world of podcasting. All you need is a mic and a camera camera and a microphone, and you're in business. Suddenly you have your own show. So, so I started a fanzine about Harvey Comics, and they published Richie Rich and Casper. Why that is because nobody else was doing it. I tried to pick something that wasn't something. And my goal ultimately was to get a book published, but again, getting a book published isn't something that just naturally happens. It took many years to make that happen. But uh, the good part about me starting my own fanzine is I got some notice, and then I started writing articles for various publications. Then they started to become paying gigs, and so I write mainly about comic books and animation, things like that. But it's nice to have that as a little side hustle, as it were.
Yeah.
um, and then eventually it got to the point where I really want to publish a book, and or I really want to have a book published, I should say. But again, nobody was interested, and so there's this thing which came along called Lulu, which is still around for self-publishing. And I saw a friend who had done a fanzine about Disneyland park rides and things like that, and he compiled them into a book. And I was asking him questions. He says, "How do you do that?" He goes, "Oh, you just do it like this." I ended up doing it, and then that book was the best of the Harveyville Fun Times, just a compilation of my fanzine, and that caught the notice of Bear Manor Media, and they asked me if I could write a book, and I've written 20 books since, and The Turtles is one of them.
Yeah.
So
well, and obviously that we want to chat to you about that today. But first, before we get to that, I wondered, like, because obviously when you're writing about that kind of period in time, the Beatles are like the obvious one to write about. Did you pick the Turtles in part for the same reason with your fanzine, that there's a bit of a gap in the market there that you could fill? Because obviously with the Beatles, it's like almost everything you could write about them has already been written.
Right. Ultimately, for the Turtles book, yes, but I did write my own Beatles book. It was a vanity project, and it was self-published. It's called Mark Arnold Picks on the Beatles, and it was just my opinions of what I thought about Beatles songs and things like that. And I just kind of put it out there as a lark. I didn't really try to get an audience. I figured, well, the Beatles name will sell a few copies and blah blah blah. But it did catch the attention of a guy named Michael Ventrella, and he wanted me to do the same thing with the Monkees.
Yeah.
And so he and I partnered up, and we did 2 books about the Monkees, one about the group years, one about the solo years. And then that caught the eye of Charles. I'd become friends with him. He's a big Monkees and Beatles fan, but we said, well, now we're treading on the same territory again. And we had this discussion about other groups we liked, and we threw out different names and everything. And I said, what group I like that nobody seems to know who they are? The Turtles. And he goes, I love the Turtles. And so that's how such ideas are born. He said, let's do a Turtles book. So
awesome. Cool. Well, and so it seems like a good time to ask, like, can you give us the elevator pitch for the Turtles book? So what's it called, and why should people read it?
I have a copy right here. I hope it stays in focus because I have a blurred background. But basically, there it goes. It's called Not Just Happy Together. The Turtles A to Z, from AM radio to Frank Zappa. And it is published by Genius Media. And we have it for sale in the typical locations, Amazon, blah, blah, blah. And we also have our own website called notjusthappytogether.com, so you can order it directly from us. As far as why somebody should get this book, obviously, if you're a fan of 60s music, the Beatles, the Monkees, the Rolling Stones, the Who, the Kinks, whoever, they fall in line with them. Granted, they're not a British group, but they were even confused for a British group, and they certainly had a #1 hit in England, which was Happy Together. And it's divided into 4 sections. The first section being the Turtles' discography itself. We go through song by song alphabetically, and the albums, and we give each other opinions about it. Mine tend to be more factual based, but I insert some jokes and things like that. Charles is more like the comedy relief, and he'll like back it up and say some funny things. So it's kind of a good pairing in that regard. Cool. The second section, when the Turtles were disbanding, Frank Zappa took an interest in 2 of the members, and they eventually signed 3 of the members to be part of his Mothers of Invention. So there's a chapter about their involvement with the Mothers of Invention. Then Frank Zappa suffered an unfortunate fall in Britain and was in hospital for I think most of the year. So Flo and Eddie, Mark Ullman and Howard Kalin, and Jim Pons, who were 3/5 of the latter Turtles, decided to form Flo and Eddie in the Flo and Eddie band, and they did a few albums there. And then in the late 70s, early 80s, Flo and Eddie were partners with an animation company called Miyazaki Wolf, and they did some children's albums. So they did albums of these characters like Strawberry Shortcake and the Care Bears and a few others. So those are the basic four sections that we talk about in their career.
Cool. And you mentioned that when you sort of were talking about doing the book, you mentioned that not many people had heard of the Turtles. Do you think that they've been overshadowed by some of the other 60s acts like the Beatles, like the Monkees? And if so, why do you think that happened?
Certainly been overshadowed. But everybody seems to know the song Happy Together. But when you start delving into their career a little bit more, or if you've ever had the opportunity to see them live, then you go, oh, I didn't know they did Eleanor. I didn't know they did You Showed Me. I didn't know they did That She'd Rather Be With Me. Those are all big hits too. They did a version of Bob Dylan's It Ain't Me, Babe, and things like that. And they did songs that the Monkees also did. A song called So Goes Love. It wasn't a big hit, but they both, and they both have a commonality is Chip Douglas was a member of both bands and produced both bands at some point. I mean, he really wasn't a member of the Monkees, but he produced the Monkees, and so was a de facto member in the way that he did that. So, and Charles and I did, I'll just parlay off on that. Charles and I did a lot of interviews with either actual Turtles or people that were involved with the Turtles or friends of theirs. And Chip Douglas was one person that we did interview at length. And he was very forthcoming with a lot of information and his opinions and of what happened and things like that. So,
yeah, cool. And so I've got to ask, so we've got the Beatles, the Monkees, the Turtles. If you had to pick just one that you like the most, who would it be and why?
It would still be the Beatles. The Beatles are my number one group. In fact, I'll be over there in August. I'm going in Charles' Liverpool tour.
Beatles tour, yeah.
In August, yeah. And so we'll both be over there, actually. But for a secondary group, I think I discovered the Turtles first before the Monkees, but I knew of the Monkees too. I don't know. It's a toss-up. And and I still like other groups that I mentioned, like the Rolling Stones and the Who and the Kinks and blah, blah, blah. So it's hard for a second. So, but Turtles are way up there. Yeah.
And something else I just thought about while I was sort of working on the questions. Have you ever noticed that the Beatles, the Monkees, and the Turtles, all three of them have got animal themed names? And why do you think that is? Why was there this sort of spate of animal themed names?
Well, I think that was a conscious decision, at least on the Monkees and the Turtles. In the Monkees case, they were formed together as a TV show, and they were basing their antics on Beatles movies like Hard Day's Night and Help. And but there was a lot of animal named groups that came out from both UK and US, the Birds, the Animals, and I can't think of any off the top of my head. Others, but there's
weren't the Beatles inspired by the Crickets that Buddy Holly's talking about?
Yeah. So it kind of goes all around, it's like, and it's a play on words. In the case of the Turtles, they were known as the Crossfires. They were a surfing band, and they had a regular gig at this one nightclub down in Los Angeles. And the owners of the nightclub basically said, "We're your managers now." And they go, "Okay," because they were pretty young. They were teenagers at the time. They didn't know any better. And they said, "We don't like that name, Crossfires. We should rename you the Turtles." And the band members laughed and thought that was a joke, and they said, "No, not the Turtles. It sounds like we're slow and stupid." And the reasoning behind it was they said, if you call yourselves the Turtles, it has the same TLES ending as the Beatles, and there's lots of other animal names, and you'll probably be confused for a British band. And at the early days, they were. Nobody knew the difference. It was just songs on the radio.
Yeah. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. I'm here in conversation with author Mark Arnold, and this is Jazz Dylan with How. How did we get here? Now
One of those nights out with the lights down low. How did we get here now? One of those nights out with the lights down low. Here we are again. Here we are again. Here we are again. Here we are again. How did we get here now? One of those nights out with the lights down low. Tell me how did we get here now? One of those nights out with the lights down low. Soft-spoken, heartbroken, into the night we go. Soft-spoken, heartbroken, into the night we go. Soft-spoken, heartbroken, into the night we go. Soft-spoken, heartbroken, into. Here we are again.
Another night out again, making more money of course. Reminds me like chill with bro. Before he went pen, I was doing up sets, he was bagging up jewels. Man see clear like contact lens. Stepped in my plain white, still got sauce. All iPhones me and I give them more.
That was How by Jazz Dillon. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to be rejoined in conversation now by this week's guest, who is author Mark Arnold.
Cool, awesome. And I think I read somewhere you're working on a music-related project that's going to be of interest to readers of this book. Can you tell us about that?
Is that the Monkeys one that Charles alluded to before, or which one?
It might well be. I can't remember.
Okay.
Well, what current projects have you got going on at the moment that you're working on?
Well, the one that I just finished that came out right after the Turtles book was a 2-volume history on Mad Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And years ago, about 10 years ago, I did a 2-volume on Cracked magazine. So I like those type of humor magazines. So the third one, which is not as well known, but I'm working on it because it was a favorite of mine, is this one that Marvel Comics did called Crazy. The British equivalent, they did a magazine called Frantic over there for a couple of years and things like that in the early 80s. So that's currently what I'm working on. I'm also working on a TV animation book about smaller animation studios that had shows that people seem to remember from the 60s and 70s. As far as music books, I alluded to a Monkeys book. Charles and I are working on a Monkeys book that discusses the Monkeys comic book. There was a comic book series by Dell published in the 1960s. I don't know if it made it over to Europe, but probably did. It was probably reprinted over there, but it lasted, about 16 issues. And we get commentaries from various different people that either worked with the Monkeys or just big fans of the Monkeys. Some of them review the actual stories in the comics. We did get an interview with Jose Delbo, who actually drew the Monkeys comic book, and he did other things like Wonder Woman, but he also did the Yellow Submarine adaptation, things like that. So unfortunately he passed, but fortunately we got the interview before he passed. So those are things that we're featuring in the book, but we have no deadline, no press date or anything at the moment.
Yeah.
So
No, sounds good. And so going back to the Turtles, so from what I understand, they're not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but you guys think they should be. Why? What's your, what would be your argument be if you were in a conversation with the people who make these decisions?
Well, I think at this point, everyone who's legitimately was from that was successful in the 60s and 70s, especially in the 50s and 60s, should
Mm.
already be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We shouldn't be talking about people this far back. And there's about a dozen groups that just have gotten overlooked. You know, we've mentioned two of them, Monkeys and Turtles. They should definitely be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. If the argument is, oh, well, for the Monkeys not being in, oh, the Monkeys were formed, you know, on a TV show. Okay, if that disqualifies them, it doesn't disqualify the Turtles. They formed in high school and they were friends and they kept going for about 6 years. Oh, the Monkeys didn't play their own instruments, which wasn't true, but you know, let's go with the myth. Well, the Turtles played their own instruments. In fact, their label was so cheap, it was White Whale's a local Los Angeles label, that they didn't go to the Wrecking Crew who did the performances on later Beach Boys records and the Mamas and the Papas and everybody else. Instead, they play their own instruments on the records and on tour. And if the argument is, well, they didn't compose their own music. Well, early on, yeah, they didn't. They did covers. Like Bob
Same
Dylan.
with the Beatles.
And, yeah, but the Beatles did too. Elvis Presley, I think he only wrote one of all of his tunes, and that was a co-write as far as I remember. So, I don't know what the qualifications are or aren't. If it is popularity, well, the Turtles had hits for 6 years straight. They had at least one hit every year. So, I mean, I don't know what the exact qualifications are, but I still feel they're more qualified than most rap artists that are in the group, or sorry, Dolly Parton, who's a country artist. She even turned it down and then decided to, maybe I'll rethink this. And then she did put out a rock and roll album after she was inducted. But it's kind of heresy that she's in before the Turtles and groups like that. So, oh well.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, and are you musical at all yourself, or do you just enjoy listening to music?
I played the piano a lot in my early years. I don't really play anything now. I've taken a lot of music theory courses, and I've done some composing over the years. So, I mean, I dabble in it, but it's not my profession by any means. So.
Yeah. Cool. And you've kind of got a bit of experience from the sounds of it, both working by yourself and working with other writers, because as you say, it's not just Charles that you've co-written a book with as well. How do you find it? How is it similar and how is it different working alone versus working with another writer on a book?
Well, the pros of working with another writer is you basically get to do half the work. So, I mean, it's like while I'm doing researching and things like that, Charles was setting up the interviews, let's say. While I was writing on one section of the book, he could be writing on another section of the book. Whereas if you're by yourself, you write it as fast as you can write it. The cons, you always have, it's like any other partnership. You have to make compromises sometimes. Fortunately, with working with Charles and working with Michael and a couple others that I've worked with, most people are pretty reasonable. Nobody's no, we have to have this. I mean, I put my foot down about certain things. I said, I really want this in the book. And there's a little eye roll and shrug. Okay, I guess we'll have it in the book. Well, if we're going to have that, I want this in the book. And I go, okay, fine. That's fair. Things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that probably makes it stronger overall as well, because it's similar to when you're working with, say, when you've got an editor and your editor says, well, you should probably do this and you should make this change, and you kind of maybe make 80% of them, but you're like, with 20% of them, you're like, no, I'm going to keep this as is. I appreciate your suggestion, but with respect, I'm going to ignore it. So I suppose it's similar to that, except again, you end up with I guess with yourself and Charles, you've got two professionals working on the same book. Theoretically, it should be a stronger book because of that, because you've got two people who know what they're doing, both kind of coming together, and he can catch things that you overlook and vice versa.
And when Michael wanted to do the Monkeys books with me, that's one thing. He did get my Beatles book, and he said, you know what made your Beatles book a stronger book? And I said, what's that? And he says, if you had a co-author in that one too, so you could play off each other and work with each other and improve each other's writing and opinions and whatever. And I go, maybe I'll update it someday and get a co-author in there and we can do a revised version, but
Yeah.
it's not in the planning right at the moment. So,
Yeah. Well,
but
it sounds
I
like
agreed with him. Yeah.
yeah, and it sounds like you got plenty on anyway. So, okay, cool. One question. Well, I've got two questions, but one of them got to ask. What's your favorite Turtle song?
It varies from time to time. I could say just the blanket Happy Together, which is a great song. I tend to like some songs that are a little more obscure. They did this song in 1968 called Sound Asleep, which didn't do much of anything, but it has some credible lyrics, incredible special effects. It was done in the psychedelic years. It's easier for me to say which album is my favorite, which is The Turtles Present the Battle of the Bands, which came out in 1968. That one has Eleanor and You Showed Me. They were big hits. The album itself was a flop, which is unfortunate because it's an incredible concept. It takes like Sergeant Pepper to the next level, whereas the Beatles were trying to be another band. The Turtles took it as a competition, and they played 10 different bands. And so they're a country band, there's what else? A surf band, a general rock and roll band, a choir, and and they dressed the part. They went to a costume shop, and for the psychedelic band, they put on like wizard hats and things like that. And for the surfing band, they got surfboards and wore the trunks and everything like that. So, in the centerfold of the album, it shows, and they actually named the surf band the Crossfires, which was their
Nice,
surfing band name, and I thought that's a good touch. So. Lots of humor in that album and lots of variation. It's almost like the White Album in the variation of the styles.
And the scope of it, yeah. Cool, awesome. And just to end on then, so where can people get a copy of the book and where can they follow you to stay up to date with your writing?
Okay. Well, I'm available on Facebook, so anybody can find me there. I have a few different websites. I do a podcast myself called Fun Ideas Podcast, which is where you can see and hear some of these interviews. You can find those on YouTube, or the audio version on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. It's available. For the book itself, Not Just Happy Together, is on our own website, notjusthappytogether.com, or you can order it through Amazon, or not usually available in stores, but I have seen some stores carry it. So if you special order it, I'm sure they'll get it for you. So things like that. And as far as, finding me other than Facebook, I'm around on the internet and everything like that, but that's probably the best way if you needed to contact me. And I'll be in England in August, so if you want to say hi to me and Charles, there we are.
Pop over to Liverpool,
Big thank you to Mark Arnold for joining me. You're listening to The Arch on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Lunar Barge with Float Away.
My future was looking gloomy, filled with work and TV movies. A chance encounter turned it around, and now my feet don't touch the ground. From the night I took your hand, and now I don't feel the land anymore. Something got me humming in the morning. Good day sunshine humming in the morning. We woke in a tangle on the back seat. Hangover deep down in my feet. And now all that I see is the water stretched before you and me. Some might say we're not young enough to float away, but I say we're just old enough to have learned how. Some might say we're too old to feel this way, but I say you're have been some sort of shadow, drifting through that sunlit meadow. I could have been an apparition. This could all be a blur of vision. And if that were true, I'd rather see in blue all my days. When you find yourself falling through time, and when you're looking out from side to side, and everybody seems to shine bright and easy with a plan and a comfy position, and you're still muddling with apparitions, it's okay. I had it sorted and my mind was set, thinking I was broken and I couldn't connect. And then I found a sort of bravery, it came and took a hold of me, and now I don't see things any other way. So they may say we don't know what we're doing, and that we're too old to grab chances like this, but we know that it's time to float away. And we know that it's never too late, and we are using this time, we are using this time to learn how. And they may say we don't know what we're doing, and that we're too old to grab chances like this, but we know that it's time to float away. And we know that it's never too late, and we are using this time, we are using this time to learn how. Some might say we're not young enough to float away, but I say we're just old enough to have learned how. Some might say we're too old to feel this way, but I say you're always young enough to still learn how. Can we float away? Can we float away? Can we float away? Can we float away?
I'm searching for some happiness in my life, oblivious and forgotten. Shall I use this night? In this world I feel so empty and lonely. Loneliness seems to be my one and only. I've been losing more of myself day by day. Nobody seems to notice the pain on my face. I'm an old soul encased in a young body. Sleeping has become a new favorite hobby. Life has become very lonely and tiring. I don't know much, but I'm still breathing. I'm not living my life, was in slow motion. Lost soul, wandering in endless ocean. Wandering in endless ocean. Tried so hard to be normal once or twice, but those were the worst days of my life. I've tried to drink away the lonely nights, but my pain knows how to swim, and so it survived. I feel so lost, so deep inside of myself. Feel like I've lost all my beauty and wealth. Maybe I'll be alright one day, I say. It'll take more than words for my pain to go away. Life has become very lonely and tiring. I don't know much, but I'm still breathing. I'm not living my life, losing slow motion. Lost soul, wandering in endless ocean. Wandering in endless ocean. I wanna sleep until I'm healed. No amount of rest can kill the way I feel. I wanna ease the pain and tiredness within, so I'll just pretend to be okay and hope one day I will. It's become very lonely and tiring. I don't know much, but I'm still breathing. I'm not living my life, losing slow motion. Lost soul, wandering in endless ocean. Wandering in endless ocean.
That was Lost Soul by Humans Can't Reboot, and before that we had Float Away by Luna Barge. You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to head over to the Ilk Shed now to catch up with Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review.
Tangerine Dream, Rubicon. Tangerine Dream was signed to Virgin Records at the time when Virgin Records were hippie heroes who had found the goose that had laid the golden egg, and that golden egg was Tubular Bells. I am not sure if they had high hopes for Tangerine Dream when they signed them, being a trio of synthesizer players that had no drummer or vocalist. They were not an obvious signing, but they went on to sell a lot of records and sell out tours. It cannot have just been bought by hippies skinning up in squats to their hypnotic krautrock drones. They also appealed to serious listeners. They were almost like a classical ensemble. Each of the lengthy pieces is a soundscape of soothing analog synthesizers, played over pulsing bass. Being pre-digital, nothing sounds at all harsh. We had heard it all before. Pink Floyd had a number of pulsing songs with swirling sounds shooting across the stereo. Hawkwind had long been making whooshing and bubbling sounds by filtering and modulating noise sources. Fellow krautrock or kosmischer music pioneers Kraftwerk were very successful at making electronic sounds. But all these other acts had drums, either acoustic or electronic. Tangerine Dream might have sounded more serious because there were no drums. It sounded like an electronic string ensemble. Nowadays it sounds like EDM without a rhythm, though the sequenced bass lines can be very hypnotic. I even found the second side of this album to be slightly disorientating, though at first I was not sure if I was just listening to side one again. I am known to suffer from insomnia, and during one severe bout I was advised to try a self-administered treatment called brain entrainment. This involves listening to long pieces of synth music called binaural beats that have been composed to feed different frequencies into each ear, resulting in an interference tone inside the head, which would affect the signals within the brain or something like that. These pieces are called isochronic tones, and they reminded me of Tangerine Dream. And that may be why the Tangs, as we jokingly called them at the time, were popular with more than just stoners. Where the other krautrock bands seemed to be looking for an industrial sound, in their less rhythmic moments, Tangerine Dream seemed to be trying to conjure up a gloomy pastoral effect. Like the soundtrack to a film of nature reclaiming a landscape savaged by warfare. Rubicon, Tangerine Dream.
Big thank you to Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review. Thank you to Mark Arnold for being this week's guest. Thank you to Charles Heathcote for sharing some poetry, and for everyone whose music I've shared. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us, and we are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please do leave us a short review on your podcast platform of choice. You can also reach out to me here at the studio on dane.cobain at wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain at wickhamsound.org.uk. So I'm going to leave you with one last tune, and this is the incredible Esther Hayes with 7 Stars. I'll catch you next week.
7 stars lost their light conscious of the damage inflicting, unaware of the impact of careless actions, careless actions. The stars had to learn the sun wasn't only to blame. The stars had to learn not to let the sun play this game. 7 stars lost their light, and with them left the night, sky blank. Silly stars should have known, should have seen it coming a mile from home. There's nothing new here, trouble always follows the sun and all it's becoming, becoming, becoming. The stars had to learn the sun wasn't only to blame. The stars had to learn not to let the sun play this game. You played a game, always leaving me burned. I'm the one to blame for you, I always yearn. I screamed foul play, you smiled and walked away. For you, these things never mattered to you. Matters of the heart and nothing but clutter. 7 stars lost their light. Why did they never falter? Why did they never falter? With undivided dedication, unaltered, they hope for the sun to have changed, for this situation to have grown. The stars had to learn the sun wasn't only to blame. The stars had to learn not to let the sun play this game. The stars had to learn the sun wasn't only to blame. The stars had to learn not to let the sun play this game. You played a game, always leaving me burned. I'm the one to blame. Oh, you played a game, always leaving me burned. I'm the one to blame. For you, I always yearn.